Welcome back to Dungeon Digest. We're doing a comprehensive review of the 2014 Player's Handbook for D&D 5th edition. We're going through Chapter 3 right now and getting in depth with each class. Today, we're covering... Druids used to be a type of cleric, if you can believe it. They were in a supplement back in the day to let neutrally aligned clerics abandon the trappings of civilization and go full tree hugger. Shapeshifting was there pretty much from the get-go, though it was a higher level power. You had to commit if you wanted the cool stuff back then. And aside from that and the Druid exclusive magic, the big thing that they had going for them was a ton of role-playing restrictions. You had to be neutral alignment. You could not wear or wield metal equipment. And if you wanted to level up past 11th level, you had to track down the local 12th level druid and beat his ass in ritual combat. Over the years, these guys have been up and down in power as the editions have changed, mostly owing to attempts to try and balance the shape-shifting ability. Did 5e manage to finally strike the right balance? No, not really. Historically, the worst excesses of druid power came from combining a stack of potent buff magic with some nasty animal forms for their staying power and damage output. That's not possible anymore thanks to 5e's concentration mechanic, but that hasn't stopped animal forms from being obnoxious sacks of hit points. The trade-off, though, is that most beasts have garbage AC and relatively low impact combat abilities, especially if you're looking at the base druid's access to animal forms. We're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, though. Druids are rocking 1d8 hit dice, like the bard and the cleric, and they're proficient in light and medium armor with shields, and they can wield a select number of simple and martial weapons, most of them being flavorful picks for the nature-living forest priest. They have proficiency in intelligence and wisdom saves, alright, so their primary saves protect them against magical control and brain eaters. They're prepared casters, like the cleric, and they can choose from their full spell list when they prepare spells in the morning, like the cleric. The druid spell list is also pretty potent. If they have any weakness, it's really the lack of long-range burst damage options, as well as some seriously situational conditions for like 90% of their spells. Are we outdoors? And if not, how high is the ceiling? Are there plants nearby? Is there water? What's the local wildlife like? Also, they have an outsized number of concentration spells. But that said, druids do have a huge pool of impactful spells to draw on. They've got anti-invisibility fairy fire, they have anti-shapeshifter moonbeam, they've got plenty of crowd control spells like entangle and insect plague, lots of plant, animal, and weather-related stuff, and the classic staples like Goodberry, Heat Metal, Pass Without Trace, Fire Shield, and more. Like I said, there's an outsized number that require concentration, and not a lot of good one-and-done options compared to the wizard or sorcerer. But aside from mostly being nature-themed, the actual function of their spells covers a huge swath of possibility space. Druids have a lot of options, and they can cover a very wide range of use cases. Not terribly unlike a bard in that respect. What else can druids do? Well, they can speak druidic. That's neat. I'm kidding, we're talking wild shape, obviously. Now, wild shape has gone through a lot of iterations over the editions, and they're all fiddly and detailed, and it would be way beyond scope to really dig into that minutia. What's important here is two things. One, 5e druids get wild shape much earlier than their previous druids did, which is in line with 5e front-loading the coolest parts of a class in the early levels, but it also means that wild shape's design needs to be balanced with those low levels of play in mind. And two, historically, wild shape has been a very contentious ability due to its swinging in power pretty wildly between editions, as we mentioned before. Part of its historic highs were due to other aspects of that edition's design, like the ability to stack buff spells on yourself in 3rd edition. That's gone now, but wild shape still doesn't want to be the most overpowered thing in the game, nor does it want to be overly aggressive in rating that power in. 5e's wild shape does technically walk this fine line, although it arguably does not feel great. Not for the player, and not for the DM. Wild shape lets the druid assume the shape of a beast-type creature. While in beast form, the druid refers to that beast's stat block for everything except their mental ability scores, their save proficiencies, and their skill proficiencies. This on its own is messy. To run a wild-shaped druid, I have to do math involving values on my druid sheet and the beast stat block, and that math changes between forms. It's messy enough that my table often just hand-waves this. Just use the animal's perception, or use your own stealth, whatever. And can you really blame us? This is a terrible way to manage character attributes while shapeshifting. Just use one or the other, don't make us mess with both. The other things the druid retains from their humanoid form is the fact that they are a person under that animal skin, and they will turn back into that person if the animal form hits 0 hit points. Beasts also can't cast spells, although they can maintain concentration on a spell that the druid already cast before transforming. That part is straightforward enough. They can also use any class or racial features or feats or whatever the base druid had that might be usable in animal form if the animal is capable of doing so. This clause creates a lot of unnecessary doubt around what does and doesn't carry over. Very bad phrasing. Finally, the druid can choose case by case if their equipment melds into their animal form and becomes unusable, falls to the ground, or is still being worn by the animal. This is important to remember for magic items. As you can see, it's complicated. Wild Shape specifies lots of exceptions. Learning the feature is a headache unless you have it demonstrated for you in play, and even then, you have to pay close attention because, hey, this game is all words and imagination at the end of the day, and Wild Shape has a lot of edge cases. Oh, and I almost forgot. Beast form access is limited by CR and move speeds based on your current druid level. So druids can't be fish or birds until later levels. Those are unlocked at level 4 for swim speeds and level 8 for fly speeds. Don't ask me how Triton or Aircockers work. The PHB does not consider the possibility of playable races with alternative move speeds. The CR limit for creatures you can transform into also rises at those levels from CR 1/4 to 1/2 to 1, which is not a lot, truth be told. This CR limit is one of the big ways that Wild Shape is restrained from power creep, and it is pretty much solely responsible for gating Wild Shape off from being a valid combat option 90% of the time. We'll get to that 10%. Beasts in the 1/4 to 1 CR range are not big boys. We're talking dogs, cats, maybe some monkeys and black bears, and eventually dire wolves and brown bears. We're talking about creatures with 30 to 40 hit points and 11 to 14 AC at the most. And that's at level 8. At level 2, your wild shapes generally have less than 10 hit points. Most of them have 1 to 4. These are basic animals that will go down in 1 hit if you try to use them in a fight. So what is wild shape even good for? Well, everything else, really. Need to go somewhere off limits and avoid being noticed? Spider. Need to do some delicate work underwater for some reason? Octopus. Need to surveil a location for long periods of time without arousing suspicion? Just pick a local animal. Cats, pigeons, mice, whatever. Wild shape is an amazing utility feature, and the only thing really curtailing the abuse of it is the limited period of time it can be active, which is 1 hour per half your druid level rounded down, and its 2 uses per short rest. It is a fiddly and complicated feature, but undeniably useful. It's just bad at fighting. Still, I would absolutely mark this one down as needs work. It could just be made a lot simpler to understand without heavily impacting its function as the designers intended it. As for the other features of note, dang, wow, there's actually not much here for most of the druids levels. The base class marks buffs to wild shape as features, kind of like the cleric does with channel divinity, but outside of that, it gets nothing besides subclass features and ASIs until level 18, when it gets virtual immortality and spellcasting while in animal form. Good lord, that's a jump. Timeless Body is a ribbon. That is, it's not really mechanically relevant in combat exploration or roleplay, but it is one hell of a ribbon and kind of a signature for the druid if you look into more recent editions. But beast spells are just flat out scary. Imagine you're Saruman. You're breeding orcs, you're being evil, and your Krebane come home from spying. Suddenly, one of them side-eyes you, screeches out an incantation, and summons a f***ing tsunami in the middle of your forge caves. Or rains down the plagues of Egypt with Storm of Vengeance. Neither of these require material components. This is doable. Druids go from being weak but useful babies in animal form to animal-shaped tactical nukes. Now, again, this is a high-level feature, and not one that should wave for much when we look at the general class experience of the druid, but still, damn. Moving on, 20th level gives us Archdruid, which grants infinite wild shapes and can ignore all spell components that don't require a gold cost. Seriously, what the f***, wizards? There are capstone abilities in 5e that give you 4 key points when you roll initiative or restore a couple of missing spell slots, and the druid gets this? Beast spells and Archdruid are the sorts of features that people point to when they say that druids are the OP class in 5e. And real talk, I'll grant you, they have the potential to be. Thankfully, most druids you encounter are not going to be this OP. Most druids play out their careers in the level 1 to 12 range, and they never touch these features. They're just competent and valuable members of the party, not literal walking gods among men. Because once they hit Archdruid, that's infinite wild shape. If you do knock them out of animal form, now they can just re-up it on their next turn, forever. And that means infinite hit points. As long as they only take 30 to 50 hit points worth of damage per turn, you're not making any headway damaging these guys. And if they're a Moon Druid, the situation is even worse. The upper CR limit for Moon Druids is 6, so get ready to face Titanothere with 136 hit points that can cast all kinds of fun stuff like Firestorm and Storm of Vengeance. To win, you just have to kill the Titanothere and the Druid inside of it in one turn. That's probably somewhere around 260 damage on average that you have to deal in a single turn. Otherwise, that Titanothere is coming right back up to 136 hit points on the Druid's next turn and dropping another nuke. In a game that emphasizes combat as much as 5e, this is basically a cheat code. And cheat codes are fun, but at that point, what do you need a rulebook for? Since we've mentioned the Moon Druid a few times here, I think it's time we dive into the subclasses. Circle of the Moon is the Wild Shape subclass. It gives you bonus action Wild Shaping, which is awesome, raises the CR limit to 1 from the get-go, and then later makes it 1/3 of your Druid level rounded down, so maximum of CR 6, as we noted. And it lets you burn a spell slot to heal yourself by 1d8 per slot level while in Wild Shape. Nice! What this means is that Moon Druids can be brown bears at level 2, and brown bears have multi-attack. Yeah, okay, we're running into some balance issues already. I'm sure you can see that. Nobody gets multiple attacks per turn without dual wielding or special action bonus actions before level 5, and Druids get it 3 levels early. On top of that, brown bears have like 36 hit points, and they can wild shape twice per short rest, which means they've got an extra 72 hit points over the rest of the party at level 2. That is crazy lopsided. This is the other side of the Druids are OP argument. Anyone who's played low-level Moon Druid can attest that they are monsters, merciless killing machines. The Druids, not the bears. Well, bears too. I mean, not all bears. I mean, look. Considering the kind of enemies that are graded CR2 to CR5, the Druid is going to be doing work during those tier 1 levels. Nothing is going to stand a chance going toe-to-toe with a brown bear. Not for a while. Not until level 6 or 7 at least, which is where we start to see the Moon Druid's efficacy drop off pretty steeply. The rest of the party at this point has access to extra attack and either their 3rd or 4th level spells. And monster design in 5e is cognizant of this. So you see a pretty significant jump in hit point and damage output for the monsters in CR5 and onward. Moon Druids, meanwhile, just unlocked. Giant elk are pretty nasty, I suppose, though you need a buddy to sacrifice one of their attacks to consistently set up the hoof attack, so... Saber-toothed tiger, maybe? No, that's 1 attack for 2d6 plus 5. That's worse than the brown bear. Okay. At level 8, we get a Quetzalcoatlus, which is 66 plus 2 damage, and a plus 4 to hit, and only 30 hit points. Ugh. Meanwhile, CR5 Tomb Guardian has 93 hit points and makes 2d8 plus 4 attacks per turn, plus all of his other nonsense. CR5 Umber Hulks also have 93 hit points, and they can deal 4d8 plus 15 damage across 3 attacks. And you can't even look at them without risking a confusion debuff. The CR6 Mage can just cast Cone of Cold for 8d8 on potentially the entire party. The point here is that enemy damage and HP pile up fast in Tier 2, and the Moon Druid's animal options largely don't keep up. Low damage output, comparatively lower hit points, and very notably garbage AC and garbage to hit bonuses really curtail how viable a wild shape-centric approach to combat is at this tier. It feels great in the low levels, but starting around level 5 and really around level 7, the Moon Druid is going to have to face the music and turn more heavily towards their spellcasting, which they may or may not have even needed for combat in their first 5 levels. It's a really bad power curve that starts you out feeling like a beast and then plateaus and drops violently off a cliff without offering any guidance on what to do next. The Druid's other features don't necessarily help much in this case. Primal Strike at level 6 makes your attacks in Wild Shape magical, so that's nice. You can damage fiends and werewolves now. So I should be using Wild Shape for combat? No, you're still gonna get rocked by anything on level, sorry. Elemental Wild Shape at level 10 feels like a big upgrade, giving you some awesome utility and staying power with the elemental forms here. But it takes 2 charges of Wild Shape to transform, so once you use it, you need to take a short rest to do it again, and you don't get any other animals in the interim either. Also, personal grudge point against the elemental forms. They've all got resistance to non-magical weapon damage and immunity to poison, so we're running into the barbarian problem all over again with stupid amounts of effective hit points, coupled with some very, very janky movement options that not much of the monster manual can compete with. A 90-foot fly speed air elemental? Is that really necessary? In a lot of ways, the elemental shapes are almost an overcorrection to the weakness of the preceding levels, but arguably it's a little too late by this point. Hopefully the Moon Druid hasn't tried to make wild shaping work in combat and started using their spells by this point, and if they have, they definitely know the spells are where the power's at, so like, why go back to wild shaping again? It's just a really messy experience. And 1000 Forms at 14th level is basically a joke feature. It's borderline useless. The real Moon Druid endgame is that Beast Spell and Arc Druid combo for infinite hit points and near full spellcasting in animal form. At that point, you're back in profoundly broken territory, and the end result of all of this has just been frustrating, to say the least. The Moon Druid has a very cool idea at its core. I want to fight with my wild shapes. And for the first and last portion of their career, they deliver. But the limits on beast form availability and the Moon Druid's total lack of supporting features to assist the shapeshifting warrior fantasy just leave the subclass feeling overwhelmed and underprepared during what should be the peak of their adventuring career. And make no mistake, they're still a druid, and so by virtue of that alone, they're one of the strongest members of the party, but that would require them to be consistently spellcasting, which Moon Druids don't have to do from level 2 to level 5 or 6. So when they're finally forced to, it feels like a concession to the game ramping up around them. The fantasy doesn't keep up, and so you tacitly lose it in those middle levels. So what are the actual problems? I see it as a combination of three things. Moon Druid offers a higher CR limit, but offers 0 buffs to the wild shape forms to make them functional combatants alongside the likes of marshals. The Moon Druid offers no incentive to spellcast in the early game, which disrupts their onboarding of the spellcasting feature and their later comfort with casting at higher levels when it becomes more necessary. And Arc Druid is just busted on Moon Druid, so that has to change. Now, I've actually homebrewed fixes to the Moon Druid for a player in my own game, and I made the following adjustments. Don't monkey with the second level. I adjusted the CR thresholds for my own player, but having seen that in action, I don't think it's needed. For 6th levels Primal Strikes, I added 3 new clauses. Each beast form gains temporary hit points equal to the druid's level plus their wisdom modifier. They make the beast's attacks using their spell attack bonus, and you add your wisdom modifier to both your AC and your damage rolls. The damage buff is mostly because the beast forms just do not have synergy with any martial combat feats, and this helps close the gap with the fighter and the barbarian. For 14th level, I allowed the Primal Strikes feature to apply to the druid while they are transformed by the Alter Self spell, as if they were wild-shaped, and I allowed them to use the combat wild shape bonus action healing for a spell slot feature while they're Alter Self as well. It's not a lot, but it does stick to the original vision of the subclass while smoothing out the journey through the later levels. I would encourage experimentation here if you plan to do any brewing of your own. And funnily, a lot of these adjustments are pretty close to Wizards' adjustments for the 2024 Player's Handbook, which was very vindicating to see. They were at least cognizant of the problems we'd found in the subclass, and even if their solutions differed a bit from mine, for them to be that close, I'm going to take that. Alright. The other Player's Handbook subclass for the Druid is the Circle of the Lands, and this is the spellcasting focused Druid. They get an extra cantrip, they get a spell slot recovery option like the Wizard's Arcane Recovery, they get an overly complicated expanded spell list, which we will get to momentarily, and they get a couple defensive features at higher levels. 6th level gives them unimpeded movement through non-magical difficult terrain, and no damage from non-magical hazardous plants, as well as advantage on saves versus magic plants like those of Entangle, which is flavorful, but also DM dependent on how relevant it's going to be. DMs, remember to use difficult terrain. 10th level, they become immune to charm or fear effects from elementals or fae, as well as immunity to poison and disease. At 14th level, they have a hit somebody else shield that causes beasts or plants to attack them to make a wisdom save, or be forced to redirect their attack to a different target, or just miss entirely if no other target is available. All of these features are pretty okay, but again, mostly defensive and specifically flavored to defend against druid-adjacent creatures. It makes sense, it's not broken, but they're very situational and they're not super remarkable either. The real meat of the subclass is the expanded spell list, or lists. They're odd. For starters, they are all one tier shorter than the cleric subclass domain lists with only 8 spells to the domain list's 10, so that right there is a shame. And second, when you first get the circle spells feature, you have to pick one of them to be your expanded spell list. Each one is tied to a specific type of environment and have spells that are thematically tied to those environments. At least, allegedly. So there's a sort of tacit implication that your druid's home environment more or less dictates their expanded spell list, although you are free to just pick whichever list seems the most appealing to you if you want. Nothing's stopping that. But in the back of my mind, I can't help but shake the feeling that maybe these spell lists should be rotating based on your current environment. If you're up in the mountains and you're a Circle of Land druid, wouldn't you be drawing upon the natural energies of the mountains where you are currently adventuring and not necessarily on the bayou village that you grew up in, which could be hundreds of miles away? Locking yourself in like that feels much more sorcerer than druid to me, if that makes sense. Sorcerer bloodlines are absolutely about where you're from, for sure, but land druid feels like they should be attuned to the land where they currently reside, like they have a deeper connection to it, and their magic should change shape as they change environments because of that connection. But maybe that's just a me problem. The land druid frankly doesn't really suffer from any major flaws in their design outside of lacking first level spells on any of their expanded lists. Also, that their higher level features aren't really exciting. Opening them up by removing the restrictions to specific creature types would go a long way to making the land druid look more appealing as a subclass pick. Not just the spellcaster sub versus the wild shape sub, but the defense sub versus the offense sub. Overall, I think the druid is in an okay spot. There's just the massive, glaring consequences of the moon druid's current design, mingling with the druid capstone for an infinite HP exploit. That's no big deal. Look, the druid is not a great example if we're going to talk design in 5e. The druid is messy and complicated, and the decisions made about details of their features and the consequent interactions that they have with the rest of the game generate a lot of knock-on effects that mess with the play experience and just generally frustrate players and DMs. Wild Shape's power curve over the levels is a damn sine wave, and later game abilities, while again not relevant to 90% of players, are flat out broken. They needed to be reined in. And it's weird because the class is strong. Spellcasting and Wild Shape together are a powerful set of abilities, but Wild Shape is probably the worst design of a class feature that we've covered so far. It's needlessly complex, and the limits that are implemented to curb power creep feel arbitrary and incredibly gamey. That animal is too OP for this level is quite literally the only reason Wild Shape's restrictions work the way they do. If flying or swimming had perhaps been better weighted in the CR calculation formula when they were writing monster stat blocks, those sorts of clauses wouldn't even be necessary to include. The limits would just be a natural consequence of the game world working the way it's designed to. That all said, the 2024 Player's Handbook took a hatchet to Wild Shape and massively reworked it. And in conjunction with the nerf to Archdruid, I think they're mostly making good calls. They clamped the sack of hit points problem by keeping the base druid's HP pool with a small bump of temp HP to help cushion them, and they're allowing druids to retain their Wild Shape form until they're unconscious. Both of these combine to circumvent the frequent issue of 2014 druids being knocked out of their Wild Shape form on their next turn after transforming, because while their total hit points available is technically smaller than 2014, the threshold for losing your Wild Shape form is much bigger. We still have this weird issue with gating movement speeds by level, which, again, if you're playing an Aarakocra, shouldn't they be able to fly at low levels since they can as a humanoid? But at least the swimming restriction got lifted. And we still have the messy stat block character sheet fusing situation, which, again, sucks having to do unique calculations for physical ability saves and skills, but I suppose limiting druids to a set number of animal forms known will offset how much of that they have to do, unless they swap a known form after a long rest, which is a thing now, so... Man, I am so tired. Look, the druid is a rough design. I just have to leave it at that. We could have just had Wild Shape change you to the creature's type and size, and take on its movement speeds, special traits and actions, restricted you from benefiting from your racial traits while in beast form, and restricted you from doing anything the animal body couldn't normally do, like work a doorknob or file your taxes. We could have just said, hey, you're a spider now. Use a spider stat block for everything until you choose to stop being a spider. But whatever. I wasn't in the room for this conversation. I appreciate you guys sitting through this one, though. I know that was a lot. Since you're still here, hey, hit the like button and subscribe to hear when the next video drops. Next time, we're going to go back to the marshals to cover the fighter. That should be fun, right? Just no more animals, please. I'll see y'all there.